Good morning. I'm Reverend Meredith Barber, and I'm the minister here at Horizon. We're excited to welcome you to our worship service this morning, whether you're joining us in person or virtually, whether you're here for the first time this morning or whether you've been here for quite a long time. We're glad you're here. Here at Horizon, we welcome people of all faiths and of no faith in particular. Whoever you are, wherever you are on your journey, you are welcome here among us. I'd like to share this morning that anyone who has questions and would like to learn more about Horizon or Unitarian Universalism, there's going to be an open question and answer session at the very front of the sanctuary, so right up here after the worship service. Okay. At this time, I'd like to invite Carolyn Moore to come forward. We're going to be recognizing two special folks in our congregation, Mary Blow and Sarah Barrel-Harrop.
Good morning. We have a special presentation today. A number of years ago, a ministerial scholarship fund was established by longtime members Patsy and Gordon Rowe to award to Horizon members who were studying to go into the ministry. This year, the board voted to award these funds to Horizon members and seminary students Mary Blow and Sarah Barrel-Harrop. Mary and Sarah, will you please join me up here? There's Sarah, and there's Mary. So, give you a little background, a little bit about Mary. She's beginning her fourth year of studies at Bright Divinity School at TCU in Fort Worth, where she is working on a Master's of Art in Theology and Ministry degree. She began her seminary studies at Hartford Seminary in the fall of 2017-2018 at the Women's Leadership Institute, then continued her studies at Bright beginning in the fall of 2019. Just checking. Mary's goal is to become a UU-affiliated chaplain, possibly working in a children's hospital setting or for a nonprofit organization. She is currently taking her last academic course, and in the spring will begin her first clinical pastoral education at a hospital. The following fall of 2023 through the spring of 2024 will be a supervised ministry year internship. She hopes to graduate in May 2024. And as for Sarah, she is currently in her third year of probably 5 as a student at Meadville Lombard Theological School, working toward her Master's of Divinity degree. Meadville has a low residency program, which means the students are anchored in their communities, gathering once a semester in Chicago with the rest of the coursework online. Sarah is also discerning a call to chaplaincy, with her clinical pastoral education unit last summer being a big part of confirming that call. She says, however, that the UU path encourages balance in ministry, so she's currently exploring justice organizing through a 2-year internship with the Texas Unitarian Universalist Justice Ministry, or Texas UGM. She's also serving All People's Church in Fort Worth as a director of religious education to obtain some congregational staff experience. They're both staying busy, and we're excited to see where their studies take them. So, with that, on behalf of the Horizon Board, it's my honor to award scholarships from the Patsy and Gordon Rowe Ministerial Scholarship Fund to Mary and Sarah for their continued studies and ministry that is very much needed in today's world. Congratulations.
Our call to worship this morning comes from the writings of Reverend Kristen Schmidt. From separate lives and different histories, we meet, merge, and flow as one here in this community and sacred space. Now, in the midst of all that makes life most abundant, may all that frees us be in us, with and among us today, and fill us with truth, beauty, and love as we reconnect with our purpose and reimagine how to live out our prophetic faith in a hurting world that needs exactly the gifts we have to give it. In this spirit of abundance, let us worship together.
We light our chalice this morning with these words from Annie Dillard. We are here to abet creation and to witness it, to notice each other's beautiful face and complex nature so that creation need not play to an empty house. I invite you to join me in saying together the words of our affirmation. Love is the doctrine of our church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve humanity in harmony with the earth, thus do we covenant together. I invite you to rise, either in body or in spirit, and join in singing our opening hymn, Holy, Holy, Holy. Okay, so at this time, I'd like to invite folks who have donations for MetroCrest to pass them to the end of their aisle. And young friends, as you're coming forward to the front, I'd like to invite you to pick it up and come and bring it to this basket here in the front. Or maybe our Young at Heart can help bring it up. Seems like we have a lot of donations, which is great. Okay, see the basket right there? Yay, great job. Great job. Hi. Okay, good morning, folks. Thank you so much for joining me up here. So we're just gonna have a quick little story today. Okay, So to start with, I want you to imagine a time long ago when there were kings and queens and castles. So once you have that in your mind, within the castle, there were a lot of people that made up what's called a court. And this was in a part of the world called Transylvania. So there was a king at that time. No, actually, we're not going to do that. So there was a king at that time, and it was really common for kings and queens to have a minister for their court, just like I do a worship service and preach a sermon here. They would do that for all the people there. And so there was so they would do a worship service like that, and the king hired a court preacher whose name was Francis David. And he was an important guy because he was kind of different than some of the other preachers that came before. And so he wrote a lot of things that were asking people to be kind to one another and to love one another, even if they believed really different things. And he wrote something that's pretty special to people here in this church and to Unitarian Universalists that I'm going to read to the grown-ups later. He said, "We need not think alike to love alike." And so the way that I would have thought about this when I was your age is that you might have friends who think really different things than you, or want to play different kinds of games, or who have families that are different than yours, all sorts of things. But they still love you and they still want to be your friend. So there's this way to find a little bit of common ground. But sometimes for grown-ups, our differences are a lot bigger as we get older. And it can be harder to find that love or that common ground. And so we're going to talk about that a little later in our worship service. So if we go back to the king and this preacher for just a minute, the reason this was such a big deal and that I'm talking to you about it today, it was such a big deal to say these things about loving one another, things that we think are really common here at Horizon especially. A lot of people didn't think it was okay to believe different things at that time. In fact, some people thought it was really, really not okay. And they said it was a crime. So we would say that that preacher, Francis David, is one of our ancestors. And so we think it's really important to share that story of loving one another and to remember people who came before us, who taught us things that we still think are important, even though it was a long time ago. So I'm sure you may have questions about that, and I hope that you'll talk to your grown-ups about it this week, but I really appreciate you listening today and coming to sit here. And now we'll sing you to your classes. Thank you all.
We come now to the time in our worship service where we share our gifts with one another. We know, too, there are many ways to give to and to nurture our community with our time, talent, and treasure. The offering to support the ministries of this church will now be given and received.
That made me feel
Our first reading this morning comes from the writings of Francis David, who we heard a little bit about earlier. He wrote, "In this world there have always been many opinions about faith and salvation. You need not think alike to love alike. There must be knowledge and faith also. Sanctified reason is the lantern of faith. Religious reform can never be all at once, but gradually, step by step. If they offer something better, I will gladly learn. The most important spiritual function is conscience, the source of all spiritual joy and happiness. Conscience will not be quieted by anything less than truth and justice. We must accept God's truth in this lifetime. Salvation must be accomplished here on earth. God is indivisible. God is one." Here ends the reading. We come now to the time in our service that we set aside for meditation and prayer. We'll have a time of shared silence. We'll hear the joys and sorrows of our community. We'll have a spoken prayer, and then we'll join in singing our responsive hymn, Spirit of Life. I invite you to join me now in a time of silence. Sarah Nadel shares a joy. She says, "Today is my birthday. I want to..." That's not it. That's not it. "I want to inform and remind everyone about North Texas Giving Day. Please support a charity you care about, including Faith in Texas and others from our Share the Plate partners." We join in sorrow with Pam Schumann. She grieves the death of her sister-in-law, Barbara, who died on Friday at the age of 80. She had been in declining health the past few years, and Pam says, "I will always remember her warmth and love of family." We have a joy from Laura Wooten, who shares gratitude for the fellowship of Horizon, for the leadership here, and for the completion of the church survey, 80% of members completed. Loving God, Spirit of life, mystery in which we live and move and have our being, draw near to us this morning and hear our prayers. We gather in gratitude for this morning, for the sunshine, the laughter, the warmth of a cup of coffee as we wake up, maybe for the silence. We are lucky to have awoken this morning, present to this new day dawning, this new calling within, nudging us to keep seeking. We gather together also in sorrow, some of us. We gather holding the new diagnosis, the breakdown of the relationship, the shame of wrongs done, the pain of the world and its weight on us. Let us remember that though we may choose to keep them silent, the simple act of showing up this morning keeps us connected, reminds us that we do not have to hold any of these things alone. Life is messy, with ups and downs that we are expected to carry. And in some ways, these waves that come and go make life beautiful. But it is more beautiful in the presence of others. Spirit, as we close our time of prayer together, let us breathe in a knowing that all will be well. And let us continue to return to that knowing when we lose sight of it, as we surely will. For all these things and those left unspoken in the silence of our hearts, we pray. Amen. I invite you to remain seated and join in singing our responsive hymn, Spirit of Life.
The Larger Circle by Wendell Berry. We clasp the hands of those that go before us and the hands of those who come after us. We enter into the little circle of each other's arms and the larger circle of lovers whose hands are joined in a dance, and the larger circle of all creatures passing in and out of life who move also in a dance to a music so subtle and vast, no ear hears it, except in fragments.
So our theme for the month of September, as I think we've talked about a few times before, is heritage. And heritage is, of course, about history, but it's also about what's handed down to us by those that came before. For those of us who have had things handed down to us by family members, friends, loved ones of any kind, you know that some of these are treasures, things that connect us to all that has come before. And others are things we may not always want and often don't know how to deal with. We are handed at times a complicated mess and told to make meaning. So it has been from generation to generation. If you've ever come to one of my new member conversations, you may have heard my talk on UU history, which really begins with the idea that we, as a faith tradition, are older than we think we are. Sometimes it can be hard to be a Unitarian Universalist because there are lots of questions you field, like, what is that? I've never heard of that. What do you guys believe? And do you believe in the Bible? And sometimes these come from a genuine place and should be answered as such, and sometimes they don't. But the questions at times can put us off balance and make us feel like our faith is somehow less legitimate, less valid, less real, just because it may not be widely known. And so I think it's always helpful to remind ourselves that we have been around for a very long time. People just haven't always wanted us to be around. We'll see that in a minute. So yes, it is true that the Unitarian and Universalist traditions merged to create the Unitarian Universalist tradition we know today in 1961, which is young for a faith tradition, absolutely. But these ideas have been around for a long, long time. So both views, Unitarian and Universalist, have their roots in early Christianity. So Origen of Alexandria in the 3rd century promoted the popular idea of salvation for all people. And Arius attended the Council of Nicaea in 325, and that's where we get the Nicene Creed. He argued that Jesus was not of the same essence as God. So this is one of the first places where we see opposition to the idea of the Trinity. We know of these two belief systems mostly from the writing of those who condemned their work as heretical. Evidence of their work was destroyed. So that's what I mean about people have not always wanted us to be around. We also have theological roots in Europe. Socinians in Poland, who were non-Trinitarians, taught about the humanity of Jesus, a belief for which they were persecuted and disbanded in 1568. And some of these non-Trinitarians eventually settled in Transylvania, which is what we're going to talk about today, and some eventually made it to England. And in both of these places, Unitarian movements sprang up. And so our story that we're focusing on today, that you heard me tell a little of to the kids earlier, begins in Transylvania, and it actually starts with a woman called Queen Isabella. And Isabella was a humanist in the tradition of Erasmus, and during her time as queen, she had passed a lot of legislation supporting religious tolerance, most modeled on that of the Ottoman Empire. And we also know that historically there's been a special relationship between Unitarians, Jews, and Muslims in this part of the world. We know a lot of that thanks to the scholarship of the Reverend Dr. Susan Ritchie. She has a book called Children of the Same God. That could be a whole other sermon. But Isabella's successor, her son John Sigismund, continued her legacy of religious tolerance, and he hired a court preacher named Francis David. So I think we can probably best understand David as what we might call today a seeker, someone who has that kind of natural curiosity about the world and our place within it. And like some of the seekers among us today, he dabbled in a lot of different faith traditions. He was raised Catholic and eventually became a Catholic priest, but he was coming of age around the time of the Reformation, and so he soon left that tradition and became a Lutheran. That didn't really last either, and there's not a lot of writing about why, but he eventually entered the Reformed Church and became a Calvinist. And finally, after a lot of questioning and discernment, which is kind of what you heard in the first reading, he rejected the doctrine of the Trinity. And so David wrote those famous words that we heard earlier in the reading: "We need not think alike to love alike." And this was also a call for tolerance to be extended to believers, other Christians, and also of other traditions, arguing that we must love one another. This was radical at a time when religious persecution was rampant. And he also set a little bit of our precedent for freedom of the pulpit, the fact that the preacher can speak the truth as they see and understand it, knowing that not everyone will agree. These are some of the practices we hold dear in Unitarian Universalism today. And here's a little quote from the actual Edict of Torda that he authored. He says, "Preachers everywhere are to preach the gospel according to their understanding of it. If the parish willingly receives it, well, but if not, let there be no compulsion on it to do so, since that would not ease any man's soul. But let each parish keep a minister whose teaching is acceptable to it. Let no superintendent or anyone else act violently or abusively to a preacher. No one may threaten another on account of his teaching with imprisonment or deprivation of office. Faith is a gift of God, and it comes from listening, and listening is through God's word. So when the king John Sigismund's reign came to an end, though, he was succeeded by a Catholic king who rolled back a lot of these acts of religious tolerance that had been passed under Sigismund. And when David denied the necessity of invoking Jesus Christ in prayer, because remember, he has rejected the Trinity, he was imprisoned, where he later died. And so you may be wondering, why should we care about this guy from the 1500s who said it's okay to believe different things, but it's mostly only under the umbrella of Christianity? Especially when his theology is still so far removed from what many UUs believe today. Well, I would say the first part of my answer comes from the voices of two wise women. A mentor of mine once explained that people not caring about our history hurt her a little bit, because, in her pastoral words, those are really like our grandparents in a way. And Alice Walker adds depth to this idea with her writing on ancestors. She writes, "To acknowledge our ancestors means we are aware that we did not make ourselves, that the line stretches all the way back, perhaps to God or to gods. We remember them because it is an easy thing to forget that we are not the first to suffer, rebel, fight, love, and die. The grace with which we remember life, in spite of the pain, the sorrow, is always a measure of what has gone before." I am big on the concept of ancestors, as you may have noticed, because I think it's helpful for all of us to remember that we are formed time and time again by the people who love us and who have loved us. They have each made a mark on us, and being influenced by ancestors doesn't necessarily mean you have a perfect relationship with your family. Those who love us are always imperfect people, doing what they can. We are loved by our chosen family just as much as our blood. We can recognize someone's imperfections and also recognize the bits and pieces of wisdom that they have given us, while allowing all that doesn't serve us to just fall away. The second part of my answer to why we should care about Francis David and the story around religious tolerance all of these years later has to do with our UU values. We believe in the free and responsible search for truth and meaning, though we have too often emphasized the free, I think, over the responsible. We also know that religious traditions and the people in them impact each other in this world. I once heard a story in seminary about Dr. Diana Eck, who was my professor for a semester, and she's the founder of something called the Pluralism Project. You may have read her book, Encountering God, about her journey to India. But at a faculty meeting, there was some debate ensuing about the influence of one religious tradition on another. And she said, in her kind of blunt but humorous way of speaking, "You know, religions don't just shoot through time and space without touching anything around them." And it's true. Though the potential connection between the Unitarian Church in Transylvania and the Unitarians in the early colonies might be murky at best, I believe there are connections unseen. That it's no accident that these ideas were bubbling up in many places, risky as they were, by people who were inclined to question, who asked that others be respected despite differences of opinion. And I would say that this is tricky. If there's one thing that sometimes upsets us UU ministers, it's to say that Unitarian Universalists can believe whatever we want. I do hear and understand this desire for a wide open faith, especially for our young people and for folks who have grown up feeling kind of theologically smothered by one tradition or another. But the truth is that though lots and lots of people can find a home in Unitarian Universalism, it may not be for every single person. My friend and colleague, the Reverend Alex Jensen, has some wise words on this. He writes, "You can't be a UU if you absolutely and fundamentally believe that there is only one path or one spiritual truth out there that gives life meaning. If you cling to just one set of beliefs, dogmas, or creeds and shut out the possibilities and offerings of other traditions that are different from your own, I am sorry to tell you this, but you are not a Unitarian Universalist, distressing as this might be." He continues, "I say none of this from a place of gatekeeping or alluding that there is a sort of creed or litmus test for what makes us Unitarian Universalists. Practically speaking, as wide as our welcoming embrace is, there are some things that are non-negotiables for us as a people. Those non-negotiables are the inherent worth and dignity of each person, no matter who they are, the rigor of critical thinking about ourselves and our beliefs, and the bounty of the world's traditions that each hold a piece of the cosmic puzzle about how we might understand these wild, wondrous lives of ours. No, you can't be a Unitarian Universalist and believe anything you want. You can believe in a lot of things, but there are some fundamental things that bring us and bind us together as a tradition and as a faith." So now I'm continuing in my voice. One of these fundamental things, I think, is love, as David describes. To love one another, to act in love. Takia Nur Amin has this to say about Unitarian Universalism, love, and relationships. "Being UU in part means maybe you don't pray the way I pray. Maybe you don't pray at all. But how do we live together in equitable community, despite what I think about God or what you might think about God? This is a faith that causes us to commit to the work of making justice. This is a faith that calls us to think about what it means not to believe the same, but to live together in beloved community, despite our own discrete perspectives about spirituality or the afterlife. This is a part of the call, the mandate of what it is to be Unitarian Universalist, to figure out how we live together in loving, equitable, just relationship with each other." So the truth is that this sermon is both for you, the people here gathered and the people watching, and not for you at the same time. In many ways, it is for the place in which we live, for Texas in 2022, for the people for whom tolerance is a dirty word, for whom belief in many ways to understand this life is unheard of, and for whom the idea of loving one another is more a theory than a practice. It is a way to respond to the things that bring us back and forth between tears and rage. We need not think alike to love alike. This is not about listening to the other side, to be clear. It's really not. But I have found in my relationships throughout my life where there's love, real love based on listening and respect and curiosity, there is an opportunity to build something. There is a foundation on which we might begin to make change. We need not think alike to love alike. And so, this puts us again into the complicated territory of relationships, those snarled and messy things that give life meaning. At the question box sermon a few weeks ago, someone asked something about, what is evil, or what is the root of all evil, about my theology of evil, which I've been asked before, believe it or not. And I share that I believe we do evil to one another when we lose sight of another person's humanity. But what about a situation where the other person doesn't see yours? Where's the line between extending yourself and harm? The truth is that I cannot decide that for you, and there are no easy answers here. We do our best to maintain the relationships that serve us across differences in belief for the long haul, if we can. And if we decide we can't, we acknowledge that we tried our best for as long as we could, and we call it good, for there will definitely be another chance. We've talked so much this morning about what our faith is calling us to do, and we've seen today that the ancestors are still speaking, that they help us to remember, as Alice Walker reminded us, that we are not the first to rebel, suffer, and fight, and we are not the first to love and to die, nor shall we be the last. And so as we close our time together this morning, I'm thinking about heritage again, and about what we will hand down to others who come after us, and about how we might learn to love alike in a place that tells us otherwise. May it be so. Amen. I invite you to rise, either in body or in spirit, and join in singing our closing hymn, We Would Be One.
We extinguish this flame, but not our commitment to welcome radically, love boldly, grow spiritually, and serve courageously. We do this because we envision a beloved community filled with compassion, helping all to thrive in a just world.
So friends, my prayer for you this morning as we go forth from our time together is to live from a place of love. May you go in peace.